Good morning and welcome to today's webinar on advancing recycling. This webinar is brought to you by the U.S. EPA Region 4 Office and the Southeast Recycling Development Council. I'm Jennifer Dabbs, Director of Outreach for the Southeast Recycling Development Council, and will be managing the webinar today. As a reminder, you are on mute during the entire presentation, but after you're logged in, you can see a sidebar with a question area for asking questions. We do have a full agenda today, but hope to allow time at the end of the webinar to address any questions that you may have. We are recording the webinar and it will be available on the CERDIC website by Friday of this week. So if you'd like to revisit today's webinar, you'll have access to that. And in the event you do have audio issues, there is a call-in number that should be on your dashboard as you logged into this webinar. You can choose phone call from your audio check and it will give you the number to call in. The Southeast Recycling Development Council is based in the 11 southeastern states, and its main mission is to promote sustainable recycling in the Southeast by connecting local supply with regional demand of recovered material. We depend largely on our membership base to make things like these webinars and partnerships with the EPA possible. So we would like to thank everyone that does have involvement with the CERDIC group. And if you're wanting to look more about us, we are available at serdc.org. I'd like to now introduce Barbara Alfano with the US EPA. She is going to be today's moderator and take over from here. Welcome, Barbara.
Oh, thank you so much, Jen. I hope everybody can hear me. Yeah, this is Barbara Alfano, and I'm with EPA Region 4 in Atlanta, Georgia. And we have the 8 southeastern states in our region. And I'm really glad that you all could participate in this webinar. We hope it's one of many. We hope to do about 3 or 4 during the year on various topics of the Sustainable Materials Management Program. And I'm really thrilled to have Nicole Villamazar on up next. She is going to talk to you about the program. She's been with EPA for over 13 years, and she currently serves as our Chief of the Materials Management Branch within EPA's Headquarters Office of the Resource Conservation and Recovery. She oversees the implementation of EPA's America Recycle efforts, as well as the sustainable management of food and advancing sustainable materials management in the built environment. So take it away, Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you to CERDIC for this invitation to speak with you all today. It's really my pleasure to be here to share with you some highlights from our America Recycles efforts over the last year, and in particular, what we experienced just this last week, America Recycles Week. So our work really began back in 2018, where we heard from many of our stakeholders that there was a need for national attention in improving the U.S. recycling system. And so we really worked with folks from around the country, from across the recycling system, participated in stakeholder dialogues and meetings, and really gathered that input and that feedback that led us to the first America Recycles Day Summit back in 2018. And at that time, we had over 40 organizations, 45 including EPA, that signed a pledge to work together with EPA over the next year to address these challenges and really identify opportunities to move forward in addressing them. So I am pleased that over the last year, I think that thanks to many of our pledge signers and the work groups that were formed, we accomplished a great deal. And so now I would like to share with you just a little bit about those work groups. We have these different action areas that were identified from those conversations, and they've really been underscored and reaffirmed as really the most critical areas since then. Promoting education and outreach, enhancing materials management infrastructure, strengthening secondary materials markets, and enhancing measurement. So we formed work groups around each of these action areas. They met throughout the last year. They were able to identify and develop some excellent vision statements about what is our end goal with achieving a recycling system that is resilient, where education and outreach has been improved, where we've had our needed investments in our infrastructure, where we've strengthened our markets, and where we've improved the way that we measure and track the flow of materials through the system. So those vision statements have been captured in our national framework for advancing the U.S. recycling system, which EPA released last week. So I'll just talk really briefly about some of those efforts, because I know that each of our future speakers here are going to talk in much more detail about each of these action areas. So I'd like to spend kind of just the rest of my brief time giving you some highlights on America Recycles Week. So we actually had a whole theme of a week, each day of the week, focusing on a different area. With Monday being Veterans Day, we highlighted the important contributions that veterans make to the recycling industry. Tuesday is where we focused on measurement, where we released our new latest information on SMM, which is Sustainable Materials Management Facts and Figures Report. So the newest data and information that we have on the national generation and management of materials in our system. We have also celebrated the WasteWise 25th anniversary, which is a wonderful incentive program that EPA has had for 25 years, where we work with businesses and organizations to set goals and make progress in achieving them around recovery of materials. So moving to Thursday, we had education and outreach as our theme, and Friday, of course, being America Recycles Day, collaboration being key to success. So we did have some really great events, just 3 to highlight. On Monday, we had Keep America Beautiful, partnered with EPA Region 6 to host a Veterans Day event at Fort Bliss in El Paso. On November 14th, we had the first ever America Recycles Innovation Fair, which was, I think, a tremendous success. We had the administrator of EPA actually, this was really his kind of idea back in April, that he wanted to have an innovation fair to be able to showcase innovations across the recycling system and be able to look at everything from communication and education and outreach to research to new materials and processing technologies. And I think we ended up having about 45 different organizations as exhibitors. It was a great success. I think you can see information about it. I'll share some links in a little bit. We have some photos of the event as well. And then lastly, we had our summit yesterday. To me, it was yesterday. It was on November 15th, on Friday. I took a long weekend, as you can imagine, after the craziness of the week. So for me, it was yesterday, on Friday the 15th. We had a tremendous summit where we had over 170 attendees, where we had all of the new pledge signers come and meet and participate in a great dialogue with some panelists from executives from across the system, and Administrator Wheeler and others presented. So the good news there is that all of this is available online. Here's some of our photos. We have some photos of the administrator and the veterans event, and this is from the fair. He visited every single one of the booths and really engaged one-on-one with our exhibitors. And then moving to the next slide, there is a lot of links on here for you to really peruse at your pleasure. We've got the presidential message. We have the national framework for advancing the recycling system, which again lays out the work group's efforts to date and the path forward. The WasteWise booklet, the facts and figures report, and success stories from the signers of the pledge. You can find photos from the Innovation Fair and Summit and videos, as well as a video of the entire summit at these YouTube links at the end of the slide. So I think with that, I think that concludes my portion of the presentation. So I'll turn it back to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, and I've looked at those new publications. The WasteWise booklet is great, and I encourage everybody to go online and take a look at those. Our next speaker, yes, is Richard Chesley, and he's going to talk about things that South Carolina is doing. And he has been with the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control since 1989, after a 10-year newspaper career. He is with the Office of Solid Waste Reduction and Recycling, and he started it since it began in 1991. And now he manages the office's Education, Technical Assistance, and Reporting section. So take it away, Richard.
Thank you, Barbara. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here, and I sincerely appreciate this opportunity. If I may, I'll just take just 1 minute and talk about South Carolina. Our office was created with the solid waste legislation that passed in 1991. We are non-regulatory, non-compliance, non-enforcement. We are funded by advanced recycling fees. The Act makes it clear we have specific requirements of things that we have to do, including working with local governments, schools, businesses, etc. We have grant funding, and we focus quite a bit on outreach education, trying to develop campaigns, etc., so our local governments will use them, will have a better bang for the buck, etc., and not reinvent the wheel. South Carolina has about 85 curbside programs. We have nearly 600 drop-off sites. By the way, we have 46 counties. So we have the 85 curbside, 600 drop-off sites, 900 plus used oil collection sites. We recycle about 1.2 million tons of material per year. We've kind of somewhat plateaued, 1.2, 1.3. But we have a very aggressive approach in of trying to increase those numbers, et cetera. We do have a robust recycling infrastructure, industry, where we have about 500 plus companies, 22,000 jobs, and about a 13 billion, that's with a B, annual impact. So just that's a quick background on what we are doing. Of course, recycling, to me, I've been at it since '91. There's several myths that go around with recycling. One is that recycling seems simple, and of course, anyone that's involved in recycling, and I don't mean residents and county administrators, etc., but unfortunately, it isn't easy, and it is a loosely connected, highly dependent network with all kinds of inefficiencies and issues, and I would say inequities as well. It's just quite very hard to do. There's all kinds of issues, but I want to focus on three. And of course, we could talk about China and the markets, et cetera, but that's not what I'm going to focus on today. The issues most states have that we certainly have, residents are confused. Contamination's up because we're recycling things. Since we've gone to single stream, things are being put into the recycling cart, et cetera, wishing it can be recycled. It's plastic or whatever, and it can go. And of course, the contamination that's increases costs, including the market issues where the recycled material doesn't have as much value. So, and obviously, I think it's clear to everyone, confusion does cause contamination, and contamination causes costs to go up. What to do? Well, from a simple perspective, just begin at the beginning. You have to identify your challenges. Is there confusion? If so, what it is? I'm assuming, like us, you have contamination in your programs. Determine what communities have low participation rates and try to find out why. How often do you communicate with your local governments? We talk with ours every day, not every one, but we're on the phone, email, et cetera, do regional workshops. So how do you communicate with your local governments and encourage them to put outreach education programs together or use what you have developed? And one thing that people frequently don't do as much is communicate with those decision makers, the county administrators, mayors, et cetera, the council. Simple, again, trying to keep things simple, develop a clear, consistent, simple message. Once you determine what you want to do on your challenges, how you want to address it, or which ones you want to address. And obviously the three bullets there, the value reusing, et cetera, buying recycled. The most important is recycling right. In South Carolina, like other states, and of course that's contamination, we all know about that, and our processors are charging more. But what we're doing in South Carolina is probably not any different much from any other state or any other municipality. We do the technical assistance. We have grant funding. We are working with processors closely. We have Sunoco Recycling and Pratt Recycling in South Carolina, the two biggest, working because processors are charging a lot more. We're trying to help with that. We do have a K-12 curriculum focused on recycling and other issues that's required by law. We do quite a bit of social media. We do workshops every month. We have 12 to 18 workshops a year. And of course, we're doing what almost everyone else is doing. We're doing the Recycle Right campaign. And that's, we changed Recycle More to Recycle Right and focused on it. We're doing it probably a little bit different in the sense that we're focusing on encouraging our local governments to return to the basics and not accept material that cannot market. I know a lot of programs have traditionally just tried to add as much as they could and get the word out, and that's fine if it works, but right now it's not working. So we're looking, for example, glass is a huge issue, as it probably is in a lot of your communities and counties. So we're just asking folks to review their programs, only accept what you can take, but keep the program alive. Since our processor costs have gone up so much, it's a priority issue for us in that I've dealt with about 12 to 15 local governments that are threatening to drop their programs because we've had counties that were making $17 a ton, for example, 2 years ago, and now are being charged $83 to $100+ more a ton to have the material accepted. So we don't want to lose programs. We've only lost one so far. We don't want to lose them. We want them to hold on to what they have and make it work and then grow later if we can. Back to the basics. We're traditional recyclables, as you can see, the aluminum, steel, cardboard, plastic. And yes, we're still trying to do what we can with glass. We have a vendor coming in that will have a new facility that can take all our glass, or so we're told. We'll see. We do have, on our outreach education, we do have on our website, I think we're probably one of the few states, we have all 46 counties, we list every program in the county with contact information, what they accept, etc. And that's a very valuable tool. And this is our Recycle Right information. We're doing a little bit of everything from stickers for carts to door hangers to bill inserts to flyers, to presentations, to social media, etc. We define contamination, getting the recycle right, and of course have it in Spanish as well. Here's some other what recycled items to come. That's a favorite, and of course we have our Dirty Dozen. We customize this Dirty Dozen and all our material, but we customize it. We'll put the county's logo on it and their contact information, and we'll change anything they need changed. We have a graphic artist in-house, but we do all this printed material. We even help them with their web, and we'll do their business cards, etc., for them. Anything we can do to get the word out about recycling right. The biggie, of course, as we all know, is the plastic bags are the #1 contaminant. We have different campaigns going on about do not bag recyclables. This is one, it's not the exact one, but this is one the city of Columbia is using, and it's pretty effective. And of course, we had this is an older picture, but these are in downtown Columbia. We have the recycling containers with what can be accepted and not, and what can't be. We have containers like this or similar containers that are 4 major airports as well. And we have a program throughout South Carolina. It's 47 state parks and historical sites. This is a bill insert. It's a cart sticker for the city of Conway. I think it's a little busy, but it's what they wanted and we gave in. But we're trying, the great thing about stickers, they're affordable and you can put a new sticker on an old one if things change. We're also, this is obviously a door hanger. Not crazy about the black and white, but that's what the client wanted. We do have some in color, but this goes on. If there's a mistake made or something in the container that shouldn't be there, they get the door hanger and tells them what they did wrong. We have several counties that do enforce. I live in Richland County, City of Columbia, and Charleston County are two of the larger counties. They do enforce the 2 or 3 strikes you're out policy until the county councilman calls and says that. That's it, quick and dirty. We do quite a bit on the outreach education, on campaigns, et cetera, with Recycle Right. We do have a YouTube campaign that will be starting on Recycling Right, and small PSAs on YouTube. We'll have our own channel. I did want to touch base just real quick, since food is the number one thing we throw away. We tie it in perfectly and have this campaign about don't waste food and try to get it composted or donated, or even better yet, all prevented. We have this campaign, we're targeting not the public, but we're a huge presence in schools, and just try to get the word out about the economic, environmental, and social impact, and go from there. But that's a big part of our Recycle Right, because we believe we can increase the recycling rate. And of course, and it's more about the campaign. Our goal is a national goal about cutting food waste in half by 2030. I'm going quick. We are different. We have a K-12 curriculum supplement. The centerpiece is obviously recycling and waste reduction. We've added don't waste food. We have composting. We do have air and water lessons, because that's obviously part of the agency. We reach about 30,000 students per year in classroom presentations, and we train anywhere from 1,200 to 2,000 teachers and educators on this curriculum. Teachers have to be trained on it before they get it. And we have a huge presence in the schools, which really helps us. And of course, we back that up with grant funding. I know I've gone here pretty quickly with my 10 minutes. There's a cover of the curriculum, but we do, as part of the outreach, we are trying to teach lifelong lessons in schools where students can learn how to recycle right. That's more about how the action was developed. That's a 5th grade lesson on my bag. And again, I know I'm going great. Oh, that's my grandson, excuse me. If you have questions, I'm available. I'll be on this webinar the rest of the time. And of course, you can email or call me at any time. I do appreciate it. I think that's my 10 minutes, Jen. I'm good to go.
Wow, well, thank you so much, Richard. Clearly, South Carolina has to be one of the model states, and it must be due to your nearly 30 years of experience in this, kind of realm. So thank you so much. That was great. Okay,
thank you.
So next we have Gavin. Gavin Adams is with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, and he is chief of their materials management section. And he's responsible for program development and implementation of the ADAM scrap, tire, and recycling regulatory and grants programs. He manages nearly $5 million in program budgets and the projects and activities of 8 technical staff. So thank you, Gavin, and take it away.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be on the webinar today and talk to you a little bit about one of EPA's action items, and that's materials management infrastructure. If you picked up a newspaper, read an article lately on the nation's infrastructure, you've seen it described in many ways. Crumbling, a threat to the economy, to the safe transportation of people and finished products. Our state is no different in dealing with what we all think about when we think about infrastructure normally. We've passed gas tax increases, made other funding decisions recently to try to address the issue within our state. Want to kind of take that and use it as an example for recycling infrastructure, which is kind of facing some of the same challenges in our state and in others throughout the region and the nation. Draw your attention to a picture in the top left, a press conference for that gas tax increase. It kind of struck me as interesting, the 2 banners that they used. Our roads and bridges won't fix themselves. Not saying that recycling is broken, but there are some efficiencies and some corrections maybe that we could all attempt to assist with. Many of those are going to be financial, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The one on the right, roads make jobs. If you've read a recycling study, you know that the circular economy provided by recycling also is a job creator. So it was just interesting to me that they chose those 2 banners. Resource inputs, again, for collection and processing of recyclables. Got to go hand in hand with data management, education and outreach, and messaging that the other speakers are going to be speaking of today. When we look at solid waste and recycling collection systems, costs that are there, labor and collection and transportation, we try to focus a little bit on processing equipment. Seems to be one of the major expenses that our local programs face. We'll talk a little bit about that, but all the components have to be there to provide an adequate infrastructure to support the recycling system. When we talk about infrastructure in Alabama, we really look at the state of the state pre and post 2008 because of some legislation we had passed. Our state is a rural state. We do have an expansive transportation network. We've got a lot of roads, rail. We have a fairly large port down in Mobile. Prior to 2008, unfortunately, though, few local partnerships or regional programs were out there. There was very little communication between them, what vendors were available for the commodities once they were collected, what were the best management practices for their local facilities, including collection and processing methods, and even what prices were out there to try and keep those programs in the black. There's very little data on our programs. Larry Chrisley is going to talk about data here in a moment. It's very important to try and prove the worth of those programs. Our education and outreach focus mainly on environmental benefits, not the economic benefits. And instead of being to the decision makers and those that we really needed to be involved, we mainly focused our attention on that K-5 audience. Large majority of programs were municipal or county run. We did, and the situation has changed somewhat for the better, but we're still working on trying to get additional private investment in processing capacity, knowing that the local programs we have, the best thing that they can do and perform well on is collection. Private firms usually tend to do a little bit better in processing, so we're trying to improve that. Our local programs were inefficient, relying on manual labor for material separation. For funding our solid waste programs, they had enterprise funding, general funds, and other sources. The recycling programs, though, were expected to be self-sufficient and really profitable for the local government. Anytime they submitted a budget request for a new piece of equipment, many of them were told your program is supposed to pay for itself. In 2008, of course, when things went a little bit different, they were again told that, why are you coming to us wanting funding? You're supposed to be self-sufficient. A lot of that was due to the fact that we as recyclers, I think, sold them on material diversion from landfill and being profitable for a local government. When that didn't happen, it kind of threatened the programs. We did have a bill passed in 2008, Solid Waste and Recyclable Materials Management Act. Did several things, just three highlighted there on the screen. The one on the bottom, it established a regulatory program that allowed us to oversee recycling operations and help to end some of the sham recycling operations that we had that were really nothing more than illegal disposal sites, helping to kind of move some of those materials to our legitimate programs to help them be self-sufficient. We provided fiscal resources for unauthorized dumps, which kind of highlighted the need for recycling as a part of an effective solid waste management program. The bill also established a grants program, which was fairly well received to start with, and grew and grew and grew in time to be one of probably the best things that had happened to recycling in our state. We tried to pass this legislation for about 10 years. Only when we put in that the material would, or the money would be returned to the local programs did we get passage. So we had the bill, it's put in place. Again, it allowed us to provide regulatory oversight of recycling operations. We put in a 75% throughput requirement. It shows up in your facility January the 1st. By December 31st, it's got to go for further processing, end use, or if necessary, disposal. Again, to try to end some of those sham recycling operations and support the ones that were actually trying to do it right. Again, our grants program that was very successful. As you see down below, since 2008, we've done over 180 grants. $19 million has been funded to our local programs through this fee-based bill that was passed. Most of the items that have been purchased with that $19 million have been infrastructure related. One of the other outgrowths of this bill that was very positive was that it helped some of our local communities realize that acting in partnership, not only could they be more effective and successful, they could also access a greater part of the grant funds that were available. See 3 examples of that there. Just this year, Huntsville Solid Waste Disposal Authority, Madison County, the northern part of the state, and 7 additional smaller surrounding communities developed a partnership. We funded through a very large CART grant to them so that curbside collection is now universal in that area to every household. The materials collected go to Republic Services and to their MRF in Huntsville to try to, of course, get them more volume and make sure they stay in business. Bottom of the screen, just a few of the things that we allow to be purchased with our grant funds for infrastructure. Everything from carts that we talked about to collection vehicles, buildings, etc. We went about our business for about 7 or 8 years and decided that we needed to then kind of take a look at our program, see what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong. We had done previous studies and reports, including some internally on the value of recycling to the state. But to really look at our program with a fresh set of eyes and take a critical view, in August of 16, we got SRDC, Southeast Recycling Development Council. We partnered with them, the Alabama Recycling Coalition, and some private partners to develop what we call the Alabama Recycling Partnership, do a comprehensive review of our program, tell us what we were doing right and where we need to modify to make the biggest impression. The report, A Plan for Boosting Residential Material Recovery in Alabama, prepared by SRDC and RME Associates. The research and report told us several things, and I'll just kind of highlight a few of those quickly. One of those, support hub and spoke. As you'll see in a moment, it became one of the most active areas that we began to really double our efforts on based on the recommendations of the report. Told us population over 5,000 that we should focus on cart-based single stream. We've done that not only with our grants program, but with our education and outreach programs as well. Several of those that have come from Richard, by the way, our previous speaker. For less than 5,000 population, it was okay to continue those drop-off programs, those convenience centers, but if possible to try to move them as well through a partnership to one of the cart-based single stream programs. The report also encouraged the adoption of a common suite of materials within that local hub and spoke, some recommendations for education and outreach, and to adopt strategies in support of that regional hub and spoke, some of which beyond our ability with the grants program, however, completely within what we were able to do. Again, some more results of the recommendations from the report, focus on that regionalization and partnerships, help those programs be more effective, support each other, continue to focus on education and outreach, standardize the education and outreach so it could be usable by as many programs as necessary, common suite promotion, and again in red, our main target, if you will, for grants was to those hub and spoke programs that were doing the appropriate collection and processing systems, support to them financially in any way necessary through the purchase of infrastructure. I always get told, many times that our state is too rural to really do a good job with infrastructure development for commodities. Taking a look at this slide, traveled to Alaska. Materials that are collected in Denali National Park, I found it interesting. They go 200 miles overland, connected with another city's materials. Then they're shipped 2,000 miles to Seattle for 2,200-mile trip. If they can do it 2,200 miles, surely in Alabama we can do it 210 to 329 miles. And that's it for me.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Gavin. That was very interesting. And for those of you that might have joined a little bit late, feel free to please type your questions in the question box. We will not be opening the lines at the end. We will be answering questions that are typed in the box, so at the end. All righty, so next up we have Nathan Wittstruck, and Nathan is an economist with our Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, and he's been working on the work group titled Strengthening Secondary Materials Markets. And so he is going to talk about that a little bit. He's participated in the workshops that they've had for the past year, and he is going to be continuing to develop the work under the program. So he's going to talk about that. Thanks, Nathan.
Great, thanks, Barbara, and good morning to everybody. Thanks to CERTIC for setting up this webinar. I think it's a really effective way to disseminate information and get some feedback, so thanks for your participation. As Barbara mentioned, I'm with EPA headquarters, so my presentation is a bit more focused on the national level and some of the things that have happened over the last year and planning to happen going forward under the America Recycles umbrella. So, you know, one of the baseline reports that really is effective at communicating the importance of this issue is that recycling doesn't only have environmental benefits, it has real economic impacts. And so this slide is based off the report, Recycling Economic Information, which was conducted at the national level and released in 2016. You can see at the national level, the jobs, you know, over 700,000 jobs related to recycling, $6.7 billion in tax revenue gained through recycling processes, and yet there's still over $9 billion thrown away each year. So there's a huge potential to you know, improve and go beyond where we currently are. It's also important to know that, so this was a national report. We have initiated the process to update this with newly released data. And there have since been a lot of state reports that have taken a more focused approach on how that impacts individual states. And those I've heard have been really impactful for state level conversations to make sure that recycling gets the focus it deserves. As you've heard from the speakers, just want to remind you of the 4 focus areas. I'll be focusing on the strengthening secondary material markets. And it's important to note that this isn't just an EPA driven effort, that within these work groups, there's broad representation. And so I just want to mention a few of them, of the partners who are working on this work group. So the National Recycling Coalition, Waste Management, Recycling Partnership, and there are many others. And so this, while I'm the speaker today, I'm speaking about work from a lot of stakeholders, not just the EPA. So from the work group, the vision and priority action I want to go over just to set the stage of what this group has been focused on. You know, the vision is to come up with high quality recyclable materials that are produced and can be incorporated easily into products, driving demand and creating an integrated, robust, and sustainable domestic recycling market. And so it really is important to think about, you know, what we collect, how it's processed, and that what we have at the end is something that is clean and easily to be reincorporated into manufacturing processes. And then we've also talked about making sure that there's demand at the end so that people are using that recycled content and that they're also willing to buy and have procurement, which I'll mention briefly a bit later. The priority action under the work group is to co-sponsor market development workshops. And so in 2019, there were at least 2 that were co-sponsored between EPA and the National Recycling Coalition at the Resource Recycling Conference and at the State of Texas Alliance for Recycling Summit. I just want to speak for 1 minute about the STAR or Texas Recycling Summit. This was the first time that they, through the recycling group, had focused on market development. So it was an exciting workshop that really focused on the importance of the economic impact of recycling. And in Texas, they've actually used that argument to have legislation passed so that there's money to fund additional research and planning going forward to making sure that they have a resilient recycling system. And I think that just illustrates the importance that at the state level, you can use the arguments of that this is really vital to communities, their economic benefits, to push forward with research and planning. So now I'll just cover a few of the things that have happened over the last year and including during the America Recycles Week. So as Nicole mentioned, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of WasteWise. That's a program we have where companies and communities can voluntarily report how they're managing materials. So there's been a brand refresh, and we're also considering ways that we can expand that program and incorporate new ways of reporting and demonstrating achievement. As part of my work here at headquarters, I manage the EPA's waste reduction model, or WARM. And so we updated the recycled content tool, which is associated with WARM. It uses similar data, but this tool really focuses on allowing users to enter how they're using recycled content in their processing, how they're collecting and using it, or under procurement if they're purchasing materials with additional recycled content, and it will quickly calculate the GHG energy benefits of doing that. And so it's a really nice, simple tool that can demonstrate your achievement by focusing on recycled content. And then, as we mentioned, the priority area is with NRC, we've co-hosted with others market development workshops. So a few other things that have happened by our partner organizations and companies interested who have signed the pledge is the Association of Plastics Recyclers has a very successful demand champion program, which incentivizes the use of post-consumer resin. NRC and More Recycling are connecting buyers and sellers through a virtual platform. This has been a popular model. There are others who are working on this too at the state level, where governments are setting up basically an online marketplace where buyers and sellers can meet and discuss privately what to do. And often this has to do with problematic materials, that if you have an additional stock of materials through your process, it's not necessarily easy to immediately know who may be interested in reusing that material. But through an online marketplace, it's much easier to connect with more people and come up with innovative solutions to make sure that doesn't just go to the landfill. And finally, the Recycling Partnership with stakeholders has developed a best practices document for processing contracts. We talked about how contracts have changed based on the market realities of how much secondary materials have fluctuated over the last couple of years. And it's important that we reconsider how those contracts are developed and think about some of the best ways we can do that to make sure that not one institution has all the risk. So now to focus a little bit on upcoming actions, EPA and NRC will be holding additional market development workshops. Again, as I mentioned, these will likely be co-sponsored with additional stakeholders. And so stay tuned for details. There'll be additional details announced about where and when those will be held in 2020. The work group has discussed building off EPA'S Demand Champions program that focuses on plastic resins, and it seems from the work group perspective that there's an opportunity to go beyond plastics and focus on a number of different other materials and incentivizing the purchase and inclusion in your manufacturing process of those materials too. And so that's something that's under discussion. And then the work group plans to release a market development toolkit. There's additional details in the national framework document that Nicole mentioned and provided a link to, so feel free to dig into what has happened and what will happen over the next year, as there are other action items as well. So just to wrap up, I want to mention a few points. So we've briefly touched on the import restrictions, specifically China's ban and change in how they've accepted recycled materials. And so while those are part of this discussion, it's not that those have caused the challenges that we face, but they have brought to light some pre-existing conditions, some issues that have existed for some time and have really forced to the fore that we need to deal with those issues and re-strengthen and focus on recycling markets. EPA and our stakeholders continue to work to overcome challenges. It's great that we have so many signatories of the pledge that have committed to working together and move forward on strengthening recycling, and that leave you with a final point that a stronger domestic recycling market supports local communities, creates jobs, and provides our economy with greater resilience to market disruptions. And that's it for me. Thanks, Barbara.
All right, thank you, Nathan. That was great. I didn't know that we were so busy. So apparently EPA is doing great things. So, all right, well, let's see. Next we have Larry Chrisley. Larry has been with the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation and their materials management program since 2003. So he's another one that's been doing it a while. And he's been working on the state measurement project since 2009. So 10 years on that. And he's working on getting his Master's of Science in Supply Chain Management and has plans on getting his PhD in Materials Management. So take it away. Go ahead, Larry.
Well, thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me on the call here. I guess the first time I saw this statement, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. I heard a variation of this. It was around 2008, 2009, when we first started kind of this measure of trying to get states to cooperate and share their information and data. And we started that in 2009 in March when we met in Chattanooga down in the Southeast. And we thought we only had maybe 2 or 3 states. And before the end of the meeting, we had all 8 Region 4 states wanting to share their data. And we came up with a platform and some questions that we all kind of wanted to know and found common place, and were able to share that information. And that was the beginning of my effort as far as working with the measurement group. And from there, those 8 states blossomed into a grander participation across the entire country. The couple things that when we're looking at measurement that we really want to kind of look at, obviously there's regulatory reasons and statutory reasons why we have to collect data that tells us to, and we just got to do it. But there's something a little more important than that. It tells us where we are when we're measuring and we put the information out there, where we came from when we're looking back and being able to see that. And then also, where do we want to go, or where are we going? And when you put all this together, which is what this whole purpose of all the states coming together and sharing, it gives us the ability to kind of share information, look where we are, see where we're going, and do a little bit of benchmarking and comparison through that. And benchmarking is very important to where a lot of times we may think that we have a really good program. But what are we comparing it to? It's kind of like if you had a point out in the middle of a big white piece of paper. If we don't have some level of benchmarking or way of kind of telling what relationship that point has to anything else, it's just a point. So by sharing together from a state perspective what we're doing with other states, we start forming a picture of where we are right now and kind of where we stand up and what we may need to be doing. But once we get that, we can also kind of look back where we were. So as we start accumulating more and more data and looking back, we can actually see whether we're getting better, whether we're increasing landfilling, decreasing landfilling. Same thing with recycling, energy recovery. We have something to kind of now see where we're going. And if you kind of look back many hundreds of years ago, when the technology first started moving, we really didn't have a real robust way of kind of looking at things. But as technology starts increasing, we have more and more information that gives us more and more qualitative direction, what we need to do to improve the system. So now that we kind of look back and see where we came from and whether we're doing better or worse, and then where we are going forward, we need to know what do we suspect that we're going to be doing, and what changes are going to be coming in the future. Those states that may be behind can look at those states that are further ahead and see trends and prepare accordingly. If we weren't measuring, we wouldn't have that information to be able to share. If legislation is starting to come down the line, what do we do? If we look at the data that other states have, we can see whether or not those practices work. And that's kind of what this measurement component with the state sharing data is supposed to kind of help out with. A couple of the outcomes, we had a summit almost 2 years ago now, and a couple of the outcomes that came out of that were that we need to really kind of look at their data. And one of the things that came out was an apples-to-apples comparison. And really, the only way we can really do that is if we take our information, like the number of tons of recycling that a state produces, and then compare that to per capita or per household or entry. And at this point, we've normalized the data. That means that the information that Tennessee provides compared to Alabama or South Carolina and what we're doing can now be compared together. Although our definitions of solid waste or recycling may be a little bit different, it is substantially the same from state to state. So we can kind of look at that information and kind of build a bell curve of what's going on here. And any outliers that we have as a state will jump out, and we'll be able to see those real easy. So using things like a histogram distribution, which is in the picture here, kind of helps us to kind of look and see what our data is doing, and then how it compares to everybody else. So nationally, what do we need to do? And this came out of that summit is we need interest in collaboration. We need other states to participate and share their data, because little data is prone to error. But if we have a lot of data, it eliminates a great deal of that error that may work its way into the numbers that we have. So interest in collaboration, sharing that the state data will help us do better. We need to have the consistent methodologies. And we talked about this over the years, and one of the great things is the next bullet point, talking about raw data. The technology is here today that as we just collect the raw data and put it into the system, a great deal of information can then be looked at and grouped with the technology. It can provide trends. It can provide a lot of understanding of what's going on, reports, all that, and it comes down to having raw data. And everybody a lot of times is concerned about whether or not they put their numbers in and we want to parse it out a certain way. But if you use the raw data, you can parse it out any way that is necessary for you, and any state can look at that information and compare it very easily with each other. So letting the technology work for it. And we also, one of the points that came up was that an independent third-party measurement organization would be a great thing to have to kind of ensure that we're doing things consistently, and if something needs to be looked at objectively, they can look at it. And this would lead to a standard where, as a standard, the states can adopt this standard and bring consistency state to state, and that only helps each of us. It's kind of like if you look at a franchise and go to McDonald's or something, you want to make sure you get the same type of hamburger wherever you go, and that's kind of what happens when you start creating a standard. And this is not a regulated standard. This is an adopted standard where the states collaborating work together to identify the best way of pulling the information together, and then ultimately, again, kind of lead to accreditation, which is not a regulatory approach, but I want to join this and have the status of some level of accreditation. So ways to kind of do this, and one of the things that came out of the summit was a tool that Emerged Knowledge kind of brought out, and I think it's a pretty good tool where you have the municipal measurement program where there's some standard inputs, the definitions are standard, the measurements are standards, and local governments can use this and put it into the system and provide a consistency that it will help those local governments see what the other local governments are doing. It's a free service so that they're able to kind of take that information and look at it. That consistency of reporting that can now go up to the state level if aggregated, or compare benchmark against other communities of the same size. And this information is also looked at from a quality standpoint from third-party presenters or third-party organizations to ensure that the data is sound. One of the things that we tend to find is that we say, well, this system is not perfect. Well, I can assure you it will never be perfect. Neither is the system that, as a state, I would be using. In reality, though, the bigger the system gets with the data, the less impact those errors have on the overall data. So going back to the example of the paper out there with the one dot on it and you have no relationship, you don't know if you're doing well or not. But putting that with a lot of other data, you're able to get some perspective of where you are and what you need to go and do. So the more we learn about this process, the better we will get. And, though we say we do things uniquely, we found in Region 4 back 8 or 9 years ago that we all collected disposal data. Okay, some of the definition was a little bit different, but we all collected that information. So we look for the things that we have that we do similarly, and we can work on that. And then through seeing the best practices that work and sharing that information, we can do better at making choices overall. A couple other ideas. Larger samples equal better data. That's what I was just sharing. As states, we need to probably drop the decimal points and go with the significant digits. Basically, one of the things that brought out to me many years ago, we had 2 decimal points that said we're saying that we have accuracy down to the 20-pound level. No, we don't. So knowing that we need to approach this a little more scientifically, it will improve the data quality. We found that the public data, a lot of times, at least here, is strongest at the public data, and that we should focus there because that regulatory requirement to report is not interfering with a proprietary need to withhold data in the industry center. Another thing is that we need to use market-based identification for materials. We try to use different terms. ISRI and the market has already identified the cells when we start selling our material. That material has a name, it has a specification. So why aren't we looking at that to drive our data collection? And then use more statistical quality checking to make sure that again, that our data is accurate. Currently, we have 37 states that are participating. I think we've had as many as 43 at some point participating. The goal is on the right, have 100% participation. And this, again, helps with the data quality, and then it helps us compare benchmarking with similar states. You can kind of see the different participation. The Southeast has been doing this since about 2009 and has been fairly consistent through the years here, and I foresee that to continue. And we want to challenge the other regions to join Region 4 in trying to get 100% participation because it helps us as states. And this is, again, a voluntary collaboration between the states so that we're able to share our numbers. One last event thing that's going on right now is that SWEEP, the Solid Waste Environmental Excellence Protocol, is receiving input currently. It's another means of kind of looking at local governments and trying to improve their data. Based on the whole thing is based on point system, probably similar to the LEED certified kind of approach, and I think this is a good potential for the future as we move forward. So, Barbara, I'm going to hand it back over to you and any questions that may come out of that. Thank you.
Wow, well, thank you. And that chart showing the states' participation was really interesting. Thank you. I'd like, hopefully that can be shared. Yeah, and this webinar has been very interesting. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. I just want to say that we would have never been able to do this without the assistance and the partnership with the Southeast Recycling Development Council. Both Jen Deb and Will Sagar have been invaluable. Will is a first in many ways. He started a recycling program in North Carolina. He built the first lined landfill in Western North Carolina. And I'd just like him to say a few words. He's the executive director with SERDEC. So Will, are you there?
I don't know if I'm all there, but I am here. Certainly want to thank all our participants for speaking today, and all of you that have listened to this webinar. Our turnout from this probably exceeded our expectations, and I'm glad you're here. Just to kind of quickly run over what we've heard today, These 4 talks were built around the action items that came out of last year's America Recycles Day and the America Recycles effort that EPA is leading. And this is an effort to bring the industry together, recognizing that in spite of what we may see in the media, recycling is not dead. In fact, it's very strong, but it's not without some problems. And the point was brought up that China, Nathan brought up the point, China didn't really precipitate the struggles that we've experienced for the last 18 months. It just kind of brought some underlying problems that we've had in our programs to light. And you've heard from these speakers of some of the work, and this work indeed precedes National Sword and China's actions of bringing them together. But I particularly looked at the work that's come out of Richard's office in South Carolina. They've done a tremendous job with communication and outreach. I mean, this is the home of the Recycle Guys that have seen adoption in many states across the country. They've got a library with tremendous resources down there. One thing that Richard brought out today that I think that we all need to realize is that they are on a regular basis reaching out to their local governments. And as I now work with state agencies, but formerly as a local government operator, I think that's so important that we make that connection, that just to remind it and to have the local government get some of their communication needs back on the top of their inbox, on the top of their work effort to get the recycle message out there. Gavin brought forward to us a lot of work about how they've taken their grant program and put it into a design for a whole infrastructure for the state, with that infrastructure itself being part of a master plan than just responding to proposals that come to them from local communities and from the private sector, but to look at how could they best manage the whole state to get their materials to market efficiently. Nathan brought us a wealth of information, particularly with the list of the programs that EPA's got that are there for us and for all of you that are listening, as well as for our local government operators. And particularly the pledge that was originated last year, which several signed on the original America Recycles effort at that point. I encourage you to find this EPA pledge, take a look at that, and hopefully your organization can join with that as well. Because as Nathan pointed out, that while we all understand there's environmental benefits with recycling, there's a tremendous economic value to the work that we're doing, and we can strengthen our country with that. And lastly, the work that Larry and EPA and others have been involved in to look at our measurement, how important that is, and bring that forward, because our measurement in the country is extremely fragmented, but through collaboration, consistency, communication, computers, and data management, we can work to get to where we have some better metrics, so we can be more efficient or have better planning, so we're winding up more efficient, and then our efficiencies will then lead to us bringing better material to market at a reduced price, which will drive the market development that we're looking for. So I'd like to certainly thank the speakers for their time to bring and put this together. Thank you for EPA for hosting this. And Barbara, I'll give it back to you.
All right, thanks, Will. There's some questions. I'm sorry, I don't think we're going to get to all of them. Do you have a slide with emails, Jen, that we can put up? My email is alfano.barber@epa.gov. That's ALF as in Frank, ANO.BARBARA@EPA.gov. And so email me if we don't get to all these questions. Feel free to email me. One is a great question about modeling and how we can do through the each stage of an item's use. EPA has an arm of our government called ORD, which is the Office of Research and Development. And ORD is doing some research in that kind of thing and modeling the life cycle. So I would like to email that gentleman or get your information and maybe put you in touch with somebody. I think we can answer that question. Gavin, somebody asked about funding for, let's see, building new MRFs, or if there's any tax incentives. You mentioned that ADEM does give out grants. In Alabama, could somebody build a new MRF with a grant from ADEM?
Well, Barbara, right now our grants are only available to local government. There is a grants program that's very successful as well in North Carolina that I believe several years ago switched over to allow for private firms to be able to access those funds. We're looking at that right now. Our main focus at this point, and again, like I say, subject to change, we're kind of doing an internal review right now, but is to support local programs in collection and minimal processing to try and get that material ready to be delivered to a MRF, whether it be publicly or privately operated. So I don't think we're at the point yet where we'll issue grants to private concerns just because of competition issues, because of statutory issues that right now would prevent it, but we are looking at it.
Okay, thanks. Will, you don't know of any grants or tax incentives to build MRFs?
I do. North Carolina and I think some others have a property tax exemption on recycling equipment, and that could be MRF equipment, trucks, other hardware that's privately owned. That program's been in place for several years in North Carolina. There is a incentive program in Florida that I can't speak to the details of, but they do have some incentives down there as well. But
okay, all righty. And let's see, this one's a good one. Does compacting recyclables at convenience center drop-off centers reduce processing expense? And if so, please highlight examples. And I think she really wants to hear from Gavin or Richard or Larry. Anybody?
This is Gavin. I was hoping Richard would jump in. I think he's got a little more experience with composting than we do. Our composting regulations and permitting program is actually handled through a different group here at the department, which is frustrating at times. But my answer to that, I believe, would be yes, depending on how it's done. But maybe Richard has more specifics. I'm not sure. I hate to put him on the spot. He may not. Like I say, that's a very, very technical question.
Yeah. Did you say? I'm sorry, Barbara. Did you say compaction or composting? I didn't hear.
No, I said compacting. Does compacting recyclables at convenience center drop-offs? So, Gavin, I probably just didn't say it clear enough that it's actually compacting recyclables.
I have never, all my years, have never been asked that question. I don't think it would have much impact at all. I certainly can double check. I can double check our transfer stations. I just don't think it has any impact at all. If any compaction is done, usually it's just baling, processing material to get it to a market or get it to a Sunoco or a Pratt, etc. There would be no cost benefit to that, other than the fact that it had to be. My point is, it would have to be done. I don't know.
Well, and the only thing I can think of it would reduce the transportation costs, because if you're compacting it at the community center or convenience center where it's at, then you don't have as many truckloads going there. We have like in Georgia, we have a farmer's market that you drop it off there and they're compacting it there. So that's the only thing I can think of.
I'm just thinking.
Larry, I'll jump in. It will have some effect potentially, because when you're compacting three-dimensional materials into two dimensions, it may have some impact in the sort depending on the equipment. But from a logistics standpoint, I think the price of the logistics would probably outweigh some of the outfalls from the equipment.
Barbara, this is Will. I would add to this, not the compaction, but for convenience centers to to the transition from source separated to single stream collection, we've got some documentation of some significant cost reductions when that happens, as well as increased material capture. If the citizens are not having to go through the storage convenience center, recycling gets to be much easier for them if they're just dumping their single stream and into the roll off or whatever receptacle and going on. And that's led to increased material capture. But it also has a significant improvement on the logistics for the local government operator in running their trucks, because if they've got multiple containers out there and they're collecting single stream, the convenience center attendant can direct the traffic to sequentially fill containers to where they're full, and not be sitting where it's source separated and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the convenience center calls the dispatch and says, we've got to have a truck today because my plastic's full. You eliminate that problem and you make efficiencies back then into the hauling from the convenience center back to the MRF. And we've got some data showing some significant cost savings in a couple of counties on that, if anyone's interested.
Okay. Yeah, we had somebody say that North Carolina, this is in regarding to the other question, that North Carolina does have the provide the grants to the private recycling businesses, and they also operate a property tax exemption for recycling. So yes. What about e-recycling? Do we have time to even get into that topic? Or another question, do we have any idea as to when the market may rebound? Let's see what we have time, one that we can actually answer, because we're over the time. So I think we really should wrap this up. And if you want to contact any of these folks directly, send me an email and I can get the questions to them, or go to the CERDAC website. You can contact, send it to Will. We'll definitely try to help you. I'm glad this was successful. I thank you for hanging in here. This was great. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to the speakers. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.